This video is made possible by Practical Defense Systems, the best online security training at the lowest prices. You can start your security career today online at pdsclasses.com. Check them out. Hi, this is Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for all of your support of GunGuyTV. I know I'm not in my usual spot. I'm actually in the back of my property over here in front of the apricot tree, I think, and then there's the avocado tree over there, and there's another one and so on, but that's where I'm at. We're actually testing our backup communication system for mobile Wi-Fi and mobile and like that, and so I'm totally off the grid, quote unquote, at the moment, and I'm not using anything but mobile. So we're doing that because we're preparing for going to our off-grid property out in Arizona. We'll make sure that we can still do things for you here on GunGuyTV. And I'm very grateful to have my friend Dan Kelly with me today. So Dan, thank you very much for joining me.
Sure.
Dan is from GunLearn. His website is gunlearn.com. And to put it mildly, I'll set this up for you, Dan, and I'll get out of your way. Dan is incredibly knowledgeable where firearms are concerned and firearms laws are concerned federally. And the reason for that is he spent, 30 years, I think, in law enforcement, and many of those years, if not the majority of them, at ATF. And so people rip on Dan all the time because he worked for ATF. You traitor, Dan, you horrible guy, you worked at ATF. Yeah, but if you ask Dan, and I have many times, if he thinks the NFA should be repealed, he'll say,
yes.
See, so there you are. So Dan is very much a Second Amendment supporter. He thinks the NFA is ridiculous and it's convoluted and it's a mess and it should go away. And honestly, with gunlearn.com, he spends his career now, his second career, running around and trying to keep law enforcement educated as to what the federal laws actually say. We're going to find out that they obviously don't know. And he also offers courses for civilians if they would like to know those things. And then he's an expert witness. And there have been a number of cases, most notably not too long ago on AR lowers, that have turned in the favor of gun owners precisely because of Dan's testimony. So here's what we're going to do today. The whole honey badger thing and the AR pistol, AK pistol brace thing has become a big convoluted issue. And one of the reasons it's become a convoluted issue is there's a lot of hyperbole out there. Now, I understand there are several aspects of this. We're going to deal with the legal one today. There's the legal aspect, which is what does the law say and what is ATF doing with it? That's legal. Okay. Then there's the ethical thing. If these things were against the law before, why did ATF ever allow them in the first place? That's a conversation we're not going to get too deep into because other people have talked about that, and it's super emotional. I get it. Then there's the moral thing. Well, we shouldn't have to do this anyway because the Second Amendment says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I get that. Dan gets that, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. And then there's the emotional aspect of it. I get that too, and so does Dan. So what I want to ask you to do if you're viewing this is understand that what we're going to touch on today and what he's going to give us some detailed information on is the legal aspect. What does the federal law say? Why is it changing? Or is it simply, it says what it says and it's always said what it says and it's that the ATF is a bunch of screw-ups or what, okay? He's going to go through that. That's what he's going to talk about today. The other stuff, all the emotional stuff and all like that, and ethical and all that kind of stuff, yeah, you can put that in the comments if you want to, but I urge you to just take your emotional, ethical, moral hat off just briefly and listen to the information because it's going to help you if you do. The other thing that Dan will do at the end of this is he'll explain some ways that you might be able to, if the ATF does this with, and they make these any other weapons, there might be some ways for you to avoid having to register them as any other weapons and going through the whole NFA process. He's going to explain that at the very end. Okay, so again, we're going to do law today. We're not doing all the emotional stuff. If you want to do the emotional stuff, just send me a note. Say, hey, Joel, I want you to get on here and do all the emotional stuff and do all the anger stuff and like that. And you know what? I'll do it for you. I'll do it on our live stream when I do the live stream. Well, we can do that then. Okay, but today I want you to just, if you would please, if you don't mind, it's going to be kind of long, and it's going to be death by PowerPoint a little bit, and that's okay. It's going to give you the information you need so we can cut through all the all the stuff that's online that's confusing and actually explain how the law works. Okay, now having set that up, we'll see how well that goes. Dan, I'm gonna give you the reins here. We're using Skype today, not Skype, Zoom today, because I'm doing this on our backup thing. So it's a little bit clunky, forgive me. I don't have all the graphics and all that neat stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make you the host. And there you are. And then, Dan, you should be able to, I'm going to change the view here to speaker view. And you should be able to share your screen, I think, and walk us through your presentation. And again, like I said, if you're watching, please bear with us. I'm not a techno whiz, and neither is Dan. We're gun people.
Hopefully this won't be death by PowerPoint, but this does bear some explanation to show on how it came about, laugh a little bit at what ATF has done, and then, as Joel said, what can we do about it? So this recent scare is, the idea that ATF has arbitrarily decided to make guns like these into any other weapons under the NFA. In fact, the recent comment by one gun writer that ATF has suddenly gone rogue is sort of amusing. In my opinion, ATF has been rogue, to use that word, on many issues for decades. Here, what they've actually done is begun to correct another one of their mistakes. You have to keep in mind that these firearm issues that continue to pop up in the news are easy to sort out if you learn how to classify firearms. We teach that at our site. Go on, check out our Certified Firearm Specialist program. And it, there's, trying to sell you something is one thing. On the other hand, sincerely, this training is the difference between knowing what you're talking about and just being confused at the next thing that comes up on the horizon. All right, these definitions in federal law are what we're going to talk about for a second. And keep in mind that definitions can hinge on every word. Everybody that's dealt with an attorney can imagine what I mean when I say that. So concerning ATF having gone rogue for decades, I said that a minute ago. Consider that only 10 months ago, as an example of that, 10 months ago, a federal judge in Ohio ruled, after my testimony, that AR-15 lowers are not receivers and therefore are not firearms, according to the definition of a receiver. On the other hand, ATF has treated AR-15 lowers as a firearm for 48 years. Since that December decision by that judge, ATF has since announced that they've undertaken a 2 to 5 year process of rewriting the definition of a firearm, frame, or receiver. Apparently it takes that long to do so. But keep in mind, once you understand how firearm classification works, it's obvious that all ATF done here on this issue is to start acting on a definition which has existed since 1968. So the definitions at issue are a handgun. Chapter 27 of the Code of Federal Regulations, that number on the screen, is where you find the definition of a handgun. And it says any firearm which has a short stock, meaning a pistol grip. Why they wrote stock instead of grip, I don't know, but that's what that refers to. But the important part is where you see it highlighted. It says, and is designed to be held and fired by the use of a single hand. Okay, further, the definition of a pistol found in the same place. A weapon originally designed to fire a projectile when held in one hand. And then it goes on with other features. But the idea of to be designed to be held and fired by the use of a single hand or when held in one hand are the important features of these definitions. Now, this law firm by the name of Wiley that came out with this article recently, which had everybody all stirred up, they wrote a good article. They cited some things that ATF says. ATF has recently cited the issues of these guns, these big pistols, as we're talking about, the issues of their weight and their length. ATF has admittedly used weight and length to try to support the position that these guns are not designed to be held and fired by the use of a single hand. ATF has further also had their own employees attempt to shoot these guns with one hand to see if they can do so. But notice that the definitions don't say can be held and fired with one hand. They say designed to be. So the idea of your size and strength don't come into play here in these definitions. ATF also has cited some nonsensical issues like the fact that these guns might have rifle sights, whatever those are, rifle caliber ammo, rifle length barrel. Also doesn't even make sense. Keep in mind that a short barrel rifle, an SBR, is still a rifle. So a rifle can have any length barrel. So I'm not sure what a rifle length barrel is. Heavy weight, acceptance of a high capacity magazine, and being front heavy. So two of those issues have to do with weight. Let's look at this form for just a quick second. This is a form that ATF uses when factoring criteria on handguns to determine whether or not they're importable. Notice the third one down on the left for pistols is weight. Every ounce of weight of a pistol gives it one more point toward the minimum of 75 points needed to be legally importable. So as far as importable pistols go, the more it weighs, the more importable it is. Okay, so these nonsensical issues are a moot point anyway. Here's the gist of where we're going on the whole thing. All these issues are a moot point because the guns that we're talking about have two grips, so they can't be handguns. They have the grip where you hold on it, I'll hold on to it to shoot it, and then they have a foregrip. We're going to look at some pictures of them in a second, and I'll support what I'm saying. So it's sort of funny that you realize that ATF has to spin this in some way other than to just say, you know, we just realized that these guns have two grips on them. Now, keep in mind that the Wiley article then explains the ripple effect. They go on in their article to say that the guns formerly treated as handguns have actually always been AOWs. That's true. That's what I'm here to explain. Look at these guns. ATF has always considered these pistols up until this issue came up, right? They all have foregrips. They're all designed to be held in your shooting hand with one hand, you know, and the other hand on the foregrip. Now, keep in mind that these are mounting surfaces for accessories. I know they have rails for attaching optics, lights, everything. But the fact is they still are foregrips. So these are two-handed guns. Now, ATF's history, let's look at their history on how ATF has dealt with foregrips on guns. Since May of 06, someone back then wrote a letter to ATF saying, hey, I want to put a vertical foregrip on my handgun. Can I do that? And ATF answered their letter saying, no, you can't put that vertical foregrip on your handgun because that would make it in any other weapon. The reason being because a second grip would make the gun no longer designed to be held and fired with one hand. So it's no longer a handgun. Of course, the gun is also not a long gun, right? It's not a rifle or a shotgun. And since the gun is less than 26 inches overall length, it also doesn't classify as an other firearm under the Gun Control Act, like a Mossberg Shockwave. So if it's not a long gun, if it's not a handgun, and it's not an other, then by default, the only place these fall is in the NFA definition of an any other weapon. What's the definition of an any other weapon? It says any weapon or device capable of being concealed on the person, in other words, less than 26 inches overall length, from which a shot can be discharged through the energy of an explosive, and it does not include pistols and revolvers with rifled bores. So once these guns are not any longer designed to be fired with one hand, they're not handguns, so they do fall into this category of any other weapons by default. So here's an example of the type of gun that, you know, ATF's referring to. They are under 26 inches overall length, and so therefore they're concealable on the person. So again, why are these now considered an any other weapon and not a pistol? Again, because it's designed to be a two-handed gun. You know, I didn't put it on there, you didn't put it on there. Whoever built the thing, whether it was the factory or some private owner, put two grips on it, therefore it's a two-handed gun, not a handgun. Now, remember, somebody wrote that letter originally to ATF asking if they could put a vertical foregrip on their pistol. ATF responded no, adding that a vertical foregrip would make it an AOW. Well, note that the definition of a handgun doesn't include the word vertical nor any other angle. Doesn't say you can't have a vertical foregrip or any other horizontal grip or angled grip. It just says designed to be held and fired in one hand. So that precludes any foregrip. Of course, ATF didn't make that point clear to the person who wrote the letter and made that request. So the next thing that happens, a company writes a letter to ATF and says, well then, since I can't have a vertical foregrip on my handgun, we invented an angled foregrip. What if we put that on a handgun? Would that be okay? And rather than ATF pointing out to the company that the issue is the presence of a foregrip at all, not its angle, ATF ridiculously ruled that, yeah, these can be attached to a handgun. It's like, wait a minute, what? So there's the letter. I'm sure a lot of you have seen that. It's on the internet, where ATF said, yeah, you can put you can put an angled foregrip on your handgun. That doesn't make it an AOW. That doesn't change the classification of the gun. And I'm scratching my head as I read that. Now, before we go any further with this, note all these guns on your screen. Since they came out on the market, all of these guns were deemed to be handguns by ATF. I'm sure you can see they all have a foregrip, a horizontal foregrip. So how are they designed to be fired and held and fired with one hand? Well, they're not. But ATF has always said these are handguns. Apparently, that never dawned on them until recently that these guns are not one-handed guns. But ATF took it a little further. Then ATF answered this company when they invented this device, asking, okay, we want to market this device to put on the magazine well of this type of gun. Is that okay? And ATF said, sure, that's okay. Never mind the fact that when you put this on the gun, not only is it a foregrip, making the gun a two-handed gun, which it already was anyway, by virtue of the horizontal foregrip, but now it's a vertical foregrip. Remember the thing ATF said you can't put on a handgun, a vertical foregrip? Well, this vertical foregrip was okay, according to ATF. So one of the reasons for these ridiculous practices on ATF's part is that they've always only given their employees just enough training on firearm tech to barely get by. You know, it's a sad fact, but I know from firsthand knowledge, very few people in ATF know that much about firearms. It's not their fault. It's the fault of the people who make the decisions on what training they get. So as a result, when some of these employees get into a decision-making position years later, that decision gets made by someone with not a whole lot of knowledge on the subject. So until recently, ATF considered two-handed firearms, which have horizontal foregrips or angled foregrips, or even some pistols with vertical foregrips to be, quote, designed to be held and fired by the use of a single hand. You know, they, up until recently, were only prosecuting some people with handguns which had certain vertical foregrips on them as AOWs. It seems that somebody in ATF, 52 years after the passing of the Gun Control Act, has finally noticed that guns with two grips don't fall within the definition of a handgun. So let's look at this. What can we do about this? Well, consider ATF's long-standing stance that when you use something in a different way, you have redesigned it. For instance, everybody knows this whole issue of forearm braces. If you put it against your shoulder intentionally, you've redesigned it as a shoulder stock, causing the reclassification of the gun. Solvent traps. If you use it as a silencer, you've redesigned it and now it is a silencer. So for decades, consider that two-handed shooting grip has been universal except for bullseye shooting. I mean, really, how often does anybody teach firing a handgun with one hand unless you're teaching people to, hold a spare magazine, a flashlight, what have you, with their other hand? So my question is, therefore, are any firearms still a handgun once fired with two hands? Is that where ATF's going next? Well, what do we do now? If ATF calls all of these guns any other weapons, keep in mind that so far ATF has only talked about the legalities concerning the importance of these guns, the importation of these guns. And if they do begin treating them as any other weapons, there are a couple of things that can be done by the owner of the gun. Keep in mind that all NFA firearms have what are referred to as an offending feature, meaning the features or feature which makes the gun fall within the NFA. So, for example, you can remove a gun from the NFA by removing its offending features. Let's say you have a short-barreled rifle or shotgun. If you take that barrel off and dispose of it, it's no longer under your control. It's no longer a short-barreled rifle or shotgun. It's a rifle or shotgun with no barrel. So with that in mind, let's say ATF considers these all to be any other weapons. They have two offending features. Number one, capable of being concealed on the person, well, 26 inches overall length. This gun you see in the bottom right, that's a PTR Industries PDW model. It's 23.5 inches long. If that gets declared to be an any other weapon, all someone has to do is add something to the rear of it or something to the front end of it, make the barrel a couple inches longer permanently, and there's an issue there. You have to weld or silver solder something to a barrel for it to count as legal barrel length. But make this thing 26 inches long, and now it's no longer in any other weapon. Now it is in the same category as a Mossberg Shockwave, just one of those pistol grip firearms, which is an other under the Gun Control Act. So, second one, designed to be held and fired with the use of a single hand. The offending feature, if you leave it at 23.5 inches long, is the fact that it has a second grip. So remove the foregrip and dispose of it. That would redesign this gun to be held and fired by the use of a single hand. ATF might argue with that. Again, based on length, weight, so forth. See my earlier point about length and weight not having anything to do with what's in the definition. It would then be designed or redesigned to only be fired in one hand. So you can take the NFA features away from these if necessary down the road. All right, last slide, thank goodness. Let's talk just for one slide about these guns, these other firearms. ATF calls them pistol grip firearms. You'll see that term on a 4473 form. These are not long guns. They've never been designed to be fired from the shoulder, so they're not rifles or shotguns. They're not handguns. They're not designed to be fired and held in one hand, as you can see. And as long as they're 26 inches overall length, which these are, they're in a category just called other firearms. In other words, firearms other than long guns or handguns. If you have one of these, or if you turn your what has been considered a pistol up until now, if you turn it into one of these by adding length to it if necessary, keep in mind that you cannot conceal one of these on your person. If you do, you take away one of the Gun Control Act features of the gun and put it back into the NFA as an any other weapon. So remember, definition of an any other weapon, something concealable on the person. Well, once you do conceal it under a coat, it's concealable on the person, even if it is 26 inches overall length or more, and you could be subject to felony prosecution. So if we get to that point, know that and stay out of trouble. That's about it, Joel.
And I should mention to you, by the way, that please don't take any of this as legal advice. Dan's not an attorney. I'm not an attorney. He knows what he's talking about, but every state is different and every prosecuting attorney is different. And he's also talking about federal law, not state law. So depending on the laws of your state, you're going to have to adhere to those too, just so that you know. So with this, one of the things I know that's going to irritate people, and we kind of get out of the legal thing and more into the other aspects of it I didn't want to get too deep into, and then we can talk about the honey badger thing specifically, if you wouldn't mind touching on that, is the idea that people work at ATF and they don't know anything about guns. That really strikes me as being insane, because I would think, and this I know this is because I know it's going to come up in the comments, I would think that there should be an obligation on an agency that regulates firearms and regularly prosecutes people for violating these laws, and then issues opinions as to what is legal and what isn't, to know what they're talking about, wouldn't you?
I would think so, right?
And if so, how do we, is it possible to change that? And how do we put pressure on ATF to educate these people, because I do disagree with you on one hand, and that is that if I'm employed by ATF and ATF isn't offering me the training, and I know that's what I do for a living, it's incumbent upon me then to make sure that I know what I'm talking about, go out and get training, to go to take a class like you've got or whatever. So there's a certain responsibility on the individual agent as well, it would seem to me, if the agency isn't going to offer them the training. But that's my opinion, for whatever it's worth. How can we change this? What can we do to help ATF stop getting off the reservation and actually train people?
That's a darn good question, Joel. I was on their academy staff for over 5 years. I was their chief firearm technology instructor on their staff for 5 years, and I helped co-write the lesson plans that they still use today at their academy. Back in 1998, when we co-wrote those, prior to 1998, ATF employees got 1 8-hour day of firearm technology and ID training. That was it from the beginning of the agency to 1988. So in 88, they started a big hiring binge, and headquarters said, hey, we want you to rewrite the training regimen, bring it up to date. We want it fully comprehensive. No fluff, but make it fully comprehensive. So we did. We wrote a 6.5-day program, which is, not like a college degree, right? It's a week's training.
Yeah, right. It's a week.
And they laughed at it. They said, what, are you kidding? We need to put these people out in the field. We'll give you 3.5 days. I was personally told by the guy who was in charge of training at the time, and he was probably told by his superiors, I don't know. But he said, hey, there's nice to know and there's need to know. So here's what we're going to give them, the stuff that's need to know. But the rest of this is nice to know, and we're cutting it out of the program. And they cut out 40% of what had been written 22 years down the road. I believe that's the explanation for what you see going on in ATF. They thought 3.5 days of training was just fine. That's just peachy. But if you run into the average ATF agent, sad to say, it's not their fault. But ask them, would you please explain the concept of a pistol grip firearm? What's an other versus an any other weapon? And they look like look at you like you have two heads. They don't know what you're talking.
How often does this blow up in their face in court when they?
Pretty regularly. For instance, over the last 6 years, attorneys have hired me numerous times to testify about the fact that AR-15 lowers don't satisfy the definition of a receiver in federal law. And I've testified every time, well, here's the definition. Here are the 2 of the 4 elements called for in the definition. Here are the only 2 that an AR lower has. 2 out of 4, that means no, it doesn't qualify. And Judge Carr in Ohio finally ruled in December, ATF, you're wrong. You've been wrong for a long time. He threw the case out. And, until that happened, ATF just let it ride. Hey, we'll win a few, we'll lose a few. And since then, they've finally admitted they're underwriting the whole definition again, and it'll take years to do so.
That potentially takes a lot of law-abiding Americans and turns them into instant criminals.
Correct.
What do you think is going to happen with us?
It's hard to say. They can offer an amnesty period like they did with the Street Sweeper and the USAS 12 in 1994. Excuse me. When they ruled those to be destructive devices, they said, hey, there's a 30-day amnesty period. If you fill out a Form 1, turn it in, no tax paid, we'll register the thing for you, no questions asked, and you're good. Of course, that 30-day amnesty period lasted 7 years before they finally cut it off. They could do something like that. They could do what happened with the bump stocks and said, hey, they're illegal, tough. I'm not so sure that's what'll happen, because there is an ex post facto law that says if it wasn't illegal yesterday, and you make it illegal today, you have to have some equity under the law for people. So there would have to be some kind of, again, I'm not an attorney, as you pointed out, there would have to be some kind of a amnesty period or a period where somebody can correct, make it 26 inches long, remove the foregrip if you're going to leave it the length it is. One of those two things, take it out of the umbrella of the NFA. And I have to say that I know one of the confusion points that's going to occur from the little PowerPoint I just showed. A lot of people out there are not clear on the difference between the NFA and the NFRTR. That's the database that ATF registers NFA firearms in. So for instance, when I say you take the barrel off a short barreled rifle and dispose of it, it's no longer a short barreled rifle. Well, yeah, but it's still registered. Wait a minute. If it was registered in the NFRTR, there was no need to take the barrel off and dispose of it. So if you had to get rid of the barrel, it wasn't in the NFRTR, but it was under the umbrella of the NFA. And once you get rid of the barrel, you don't leave it in your own house. That's still constructive possession.
Okay, would you explain that? Because I was going to ask you about that. What does constructive possession mean?
If you have, let's say you have a short barrel rifle, you take the barrel off and you put the receiver in one drawer of a cabinet and the barrel in another drawer of a cabinet, do you still have a short barreled rifle? Sure, all you did was take it apart. Of course, that's always arguable in court, but yeah. What if you took it apart and laid them right next to each other on a table? Do you still have a short barreled rifle? Okay, well, at some point, what if one of them is in your dresser drawer and the other one is in the trunk of your car up the driveway, or maybe your storage unit that you rent on the other side of town? At some point, the court will find that, hey, you still constructively possess that illegal firearm. You just took it apart and tried to put some distance between the parts, but you still have control over both parts. So that control that you still exert over both parts is what allows you to snap them back together at any time. And that's why many courts will find you to be in violation due to that constructive possession.
So the idea of just taking the barrel off, or separating the upper from the lower and putting them both in the safe is not going to fly.
No, when you take the offending features off of an NFA firearm, you need to dispose of it, meaning either A, destroy it, or put it under the control of somebody else where you no longer have control. Having your wife put it in the other room, that's not what we're talking about.
No.
Have your buddy keep it at his house. If he doesn't have a receiver it'll fit on, but somebody else's control where you can't just go get it when you want it. And in the interim, you can register that receiver if you want. Once it's registered, go get that part, put it back on, something like that. But you want to dispose of the offending feature from the time, the violation is discovered until it's been remedied by either registering it or in some other way making the firearm no longer qualify as an NFA.
Do you think the concern about registration leading to confiscation, based upon your experience with ATF, is a valid one?
Registration versus confiscation.
Do you think that if I register a gun, there is a greater likelihood that one day that will be confiscated than there is if I don't register it?
I think so, because there's definitely a record that never goes away. The NFRTR never goes away. On the other hand, when you buy a gun from an FFL, they're required to keep that FFL form for 20 years on their premises. But that FFL, that 4473 form, does not go to anybody else. It stays on the premises of the dealership. And 20 years and a day after it's completed, it can be destroyed. So it doesn't last forever. So you keep that gun for 20 years and the FFL then shreds or burns it. There's no record you ever bought that gun. Whereas once it's in the NFRTR, it's in there to stay. Not only that, as far as removing the offending features from one of these things versus registering it, if you're going to register it, you're in for $200 unless there's an amnesty on the tax, right?
Yep.
And you can certainly modify it for less than $200. I mean, if all you're going to do is remove the foregrip, that costs you nothing to just take a part off of it. If you choose to buy some kind of an extension, whether it's a forearm brace or what, to make the length longer, it's probably not going to cost you $200. So you're money ahead. So yeah, all advantages point toward, removing the offending features and making it a non-NFA firearm.
Right now, as you said, it sounds like ATF has done some limited things, but they haven't moved forward with making all of these, essentially giving the nod, saying all of these are now any other weapons, unless I've got that wrong. And if they haven't already done so, are you of the opinion that they probably will? That this is something we should be prepared for?
Yeah. I mean, if they're considering not allowing them to be imported because they're any other weapons, then the next logical conclusion is, well, hey, what about the ones that are already in the U.S.? They're any other weapons too. None of them are any other weapons because they were foreign made. So no matter where they were made, if they're any other weapons, it's because the features they have, and they have the features here or not here. So yeah, if they're going to say you can't import them anymore because they're AOWs, then the ones that are already here are AOWs. On the other hand, nothing makes sense concerning the way ATF has handled this. How on God's earth have they not realized that these things have two grips from day one?
What happened with the honey badger thing? What exactly was the issue with that? Is that different than what you just described, or is it something else? Or is it the same?
The cease and desist letter that ATF wrote says, I don't have the verbiage in front of me, but it said something to the effect that Q's advertisement of the honey badger indicated intent, which would make the gun a short barrel rifle. Well, the two features of a short barrel rifle are a barrel under 16 inches and designed to be fired from the shoulder. So nothing in their advertisement, I mean, there was no question as to barrel length. So the only thing that needed to be, the only intent that would have needed to be indicated was intent to fire it from the shoulder. As soon as I saw that cease and desist letter, I went online, looked at Q's website to see what verbiage was used. Of course, their advertisement of that model had already been pulled, and I don't know what it said. I would love to know what verbiage they had used to supposedly indicate intent to fire from the shoulder. I don't know. And ATF, of course, didn't quote it in their letter.
Of course not. Well, which brings up an interesting question, and I don't know if this has any bearing at all, but being a YouTuber, if I were to take a gun that is designed to be fired with one hand, and in a YouTube video, I take some ABC company, firearms company, makes an AR pistol, and I review it, and in my video, I shoot it with two hands. Is that potentially a problem? I mean, should we YouTubers stop doing that, I guess is my question.
That's the thing about these definitions, designed to be held and fired in one hand, and then consider ATF's longstanding practice of saying that, hey, if you use something in a different way, you've redesigned it. So if you fire a Glock with two hands, have you redesigned it?
Yeah, see, that's the thing that's confusing, right? This is really weird stuff.
I attended a seminar that was being taught by the then chief of firearm technology 3-4 years ago at a forensics trade show. And considering this is, I think it was in about 2017 when the most recent letter came out concerning forearm braces, where they tried to clear the air and all they did was further muddy the waters. And I asked the guy personally, I said, so by the same token, if I held a Glock up here against my shoulder and fired it, then it has a rifled barrel and I've just designed it to be fired from the shoulder. I said, does that make it a rifle? And he stared me in the eye and he said, be careful of what question you ask. That was the end of his answer.
Oh my gosh.
So there's an example of the kind of thought pattern that, I don't know.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
The whole thing hinges on ATF is supposed to regulate the firearm industry, but it's not there to inhibit the firearm industry. And that's the difference. I mean, if the FDA, their job, for instance, is to regulate the production of beef, pork, chicken, et cetera. But when they start saying, hey, you can't raise any more cows because we don't like them, you better switch over to pigs and chickens. What? So that's the perception I get on some of these activities.
If you had, and we only have a couple minutes left, we probably ought to wrap it up. If you had anything you wanted to say to gun owners right now with regard to what's going on with ATF or ATF in general, any advice that you would give them, what would it be?
No matter how much it sounds like a sales pitch, I can't help it. Learn what you're talking about. Take our courses and learn how this stuff all plays out so that there is not all this, every time they come up with something new, all anybody knows to do is, well, hey, what I heard at the gun show and the little bit I know here, which doesn't fit in with the little bit I know there. I mean, we've designed this course so that it all falls into place. That's what I would offer. Learn the facts of the game you're playing.
Dan is right. If we can get the education, get the knowledge is power, we're far ahead of the game if we actually know. And like I said, we didn't get into the emotional thing and the all the other stuff and right or wrong. We didn't get into right or wrong here, because if we get into right or wrong, it's subjective for most people. 99% of the time in this subject, Dan and I are going to agree on right or wrong, and you probably would too. But what we wanted to do was at least cover the law for you, so you had an idea of where it sits. That it's not an issue of ATF going rogue. It's the fact that they've been rogue for a long time, and they've been misapplying the definition for a long time, and as a result, they've screwed a lot of people up. Now, if you ask me or Dan whether the NFA should be there at all, as you found out at the beginning of the show, we'd both say no, because it's ridiculous. And Dan, if I'm not going to ask him to explain that, because I know him, he could go on for a week explaining to you why the NFA should not exist, and it would really be entertaining, and you would learn a lot, but you'd be asleep because at some point or other you got to quit. So I'm not going to do it. Dan, is there anything we didn't talk about that we should talk about that maybe we ought to clarify? No,
I think we're good.
We did it. Hey, thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I'm going to put a link to Dan's website in the description. So I urge you, as a guy who hasn't taken his course yet, right? What a hypocrite. I urge you to go take his course. I need to do the same, and we'll learn a lot more. And then if you want to post emotional things and like that, or you want to discuss that in the comments, please feel free. The only thing I would ask of you is leave the swear words out, because if you don't, the filter will filter out your comment, and then your comment won't be shown. So let's not populate it with a bunch of profanity. That isn't necessary. We can make our points made and try to be, at least nice to each other to some degree. So let's be nice, shall we? All right. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful week. Thank you very much, Dan, for taking your busy time to do this. I really do appreciate it. Wherever you go, whatever you do, be safe.